New York City's iconic yellow cabs are as synonymous with the Big Apple as any of its landmarks. From Travis Bickle's famous Checker cab to the Chevy Caprices and legendary Ford Crown Vics, these were all-American transport for the all-American melting pot. Until they weren't. Like most automotive upheaval from the late 20th century, we can trace the origins of this story back to the oil crisis of 1973. Americans made the most of cheap gasoline throughout the 50s and 60s, and the Checker A-Series was no exception, employing Chevy inline sixes and even the small block 283 and 327 V8s. There was a brief look at diesel in the late 1950s, with Plymouth teaming up with English tractor engine maker Perkins to fit a 4-cylinder diesel to a few of its Savoy taxis. The 60 horsepower P4C diesel revved to a lofty 3,000 RPM and produced 60 horsepower. The excellent fuel economy was just not enough to ingratiate drivers to these otherwise slow, clattery and smoky cars. Gas reigned supreme until 1973. Israel fought the Yom Kippur War in October of that year against a coalition of Middle Eastern countries, many of whom were the major oil producers which made up OPEC, or the Organization of Arab Oil Exporting Countries. In retaliation for Western support for Israel during the war, Arab oil was embargoed, causing a shock 300% price rise per barrel. The sting was most keenly felt in the US, causing a major crisis where gas was in very short supply. Car manufacturers quickly looked to increase fuel economy, contributing to what is known as the malaise era, as consumers looked to foreign imports with smaller engines and better gas mileage, and domestic manufacturers struggled to pivot to compete. Meanwhile, in New York City, Checker had near dominance in the taxi market. This was a result of Checker controlling both the taxi service and the manufacture of cars. By the early 70s, this began to change, especially after the state pursued Checker on antitrust charges regarding a monopoly. The A-Series lost its grip as drivers began to choose different manufacturers, with the last Checker A-Series built in 1982. In the mid-70s, cab buyers in New York looked desperately for a car that would have the fuel economy to weather the oil crisis. They found it across the Atlantic in France. The immensely popular Peugeot 504 had been produced since 1969, winning European Car of the Year on its launch. The Pininfarina designed car was supremely comfortable, reliable, and best of all, it was offered with an economical diesel engine. In the very early 70s, Peugeot and Mercedes-Benz were the two main car manufacturers selling diesels. Both the 504 and the Mercedes W115 were excellent cars, but the Mercedes would have commanded a much higher price compared to the Peugeot, which didn't suit taxi drivers outside of Germany. The diesel lump found in the Peugeot was designed by a company called Indenor, and really these were small inboard marine engines. The 2-litre XD88, 2.1-litre XD90 and 2.3-litre XD2 engines were all naturally aspirated, inline 4-cylinders, producing between 50 and 65 horsepower. They were unstressed, very reliable, and more refined than the earlier Perkins units which had been fitted to the Savoy. While Peugeot isn't sold in the US today, back in the 70s there was a fairly comprehensive dealer network, so ordering cars posed no issue. The 504 had already been federalised, losing its pretty glass headlights to a set of sealed beam units, and gaining 5 mph safety bumpers. The car took hold in relatively small numbers throughout the 70s. In 1981, however, Peugeot released the 505. The underpinnings were more or less unchanged, but the car had a new, more sleek body style, again in collaboration with Pininfarina. By 1981, there were 850 Peugeot taxis on the streets of New York. Peugeot's North American sales manager hoped this would increase to 1,200 by the end of that year, but fate had other ideas. European cars are smaller than their American counterparts, and this was especially true in the past. Consumers lamented that they couldn't fit as much into a Peugeot taxi, and there were actually reports of people putting their hand back down when hailing a taxi if they saw a 505 coming. While the taxis were mechanically excellent, spare parts weren't as available as American brands, and diesel fuel wasn't as readily available as gas, with drivers complaining about long waits to refuel. At the end of the day, New Yorkers voted with their wallets, and the Peugeots began to lose out to American heavy hitters such as the Chevy Caprice and the Ford Crown Vic as the 80s wore on. As the 1990s gave way to the 2000s, American dominance again slipped, this time to Japan, as the Toyota Prius hybrid became ubiquitous on the streets of the Big Apple. These days, it is rare to see an American-made yellow cab in New York. Peugeot was the first foreign manufacturer to break in. Maybe it was just too soon. In Africa and the Middle East, these same Peugeot 504 and 505 taxis still ply their trade across roads that are barely there. I leave it up to you to decide whether that says more about New York or Senegal.